This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And today we're delighted to have Peggy Townsend with us today. She's going to be talking about the brand new book, The Botanist's Assistant. We have copies here at the store. And we're really happy that Meg Waite Clayton is going to be in conversation with her today. And here's a copy of her latest book, Typewriter Beach. And astonishingly, we still have at least one signed copy. So I'll put a link in the comments field. I'm sure the paperback's coming before too long. If you'd like to order either of these books, or if you have questions for Peggy or Meg, go ahead and type them in, and Barbara will bring me back towards the end of the hour, and I'd be happy to ask any questions you might have. So I think that's it. Barbara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I see that I'm in shadow because I forgot to turn lights on, so I will do that. Anyway, this is such a pleasure. I love meeting authors new to me. And we had already made this our November subscription club book for our Cozy Crime group. And I absolutely loved reading it recently. But Meg will tell you that she is in a writer's group. Is that it, Meg?
The Rough Drafts. It's a writing group on the West Coast where Peggy and I are, and it's a great group. And yeah, we read each other's books and comment and hopefully make them better.
Well, I'm not sure. Well, I can't say whether you made this one better if it was already this great and you just read it, but there we are. So, anyway, why don't I leave this conversation to you while I go turn lights on, but I'll be sitting around in case I need to feel like interjecting something. You know how I am. I can never actually stay quiet.
We love to hear from you, Barbara, so jump in anytime.
Okay. All right. I'll be right back.
Okay.
And I have to say that the rough drafts did make my book better, and I'll talk about that later, but they did.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting what we do for each other because it's the same. You said to me about Typewriter Beach, it was the same but better. And part of that is the group's comments, and part of that is the editing process, and we can talk about all that. But I would like to start first by talking a little bit about the book. I'm gonna tout a couple of nice quotes that have to introduce it. Mother-daughter murder night author Nina Simon calls it. Did she say Nina or Nina?
Nina.
Nina. Calls it The Maid Meets Lessons in Chemistry in This Clever, Charming Mystery. Library Journal and Star Review calls it cleverly crafted, science-centric, a cleverly crafted, science-centric puzzler with a delectably deadpan sense of humor and graced with an exceptionally entertaining cast of characters, which we're going to start talking about. That one was written by John Charles, who is a longtime librarian who's now a bookseller at Poison Pen, so we're really excited about that. Book page says it's a towering, routine-following, and totally brilliant Margaret Finch is a sleuth to remember, which she certainly is. And of course, as Barbara said, it's the Poison Pen named it their November Cozy. So Peggy, if it's all right with you, I'd love to start talking about the characters. Does that seem like a good place to start?
Yes, that's a great place to start because it's a pretty character-centric book.
It's a very, very character-centric book, and as all the praise goes to the characters. And this is, I didn't realize when we were working on it in the group that it's a cozy, but of course it is, and it has that, wonderfully. Go, Barbara.
Okay, let me just get in there and say that cozy can be a deceptive term. I think of this as a traditional mystery, and cozy in the UK does mean traditional mystery. I mean, they said that P.D. James wrote cozies, for heaven's sake. But in this country, cozies are often equated with cute. It's like the cat sitter decides to. I mean, and there's the vibe is there should be no violence on the page. People get killed, but never right in front of you. Minimal, if no profanity. Some people wish absolutely none. And no sex on the page either. And I think that traditional mystery is a fairer description of this book. And I'm not saying that any of those things actually happen in this book, but I just didn't think cozy equaling cute is a fair description here.
Yeah, it's for one thing, it's really funny and clever and very. It's got a wonderful plot, and so I mean, if Agatha Christie writes cozies, then maybe it's a cozy. I don't know, but
Exactly.
it's that
Yeah.
kind of puzzle mystery that just tickles your brain. But at the same time, it's really, really character rich.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
I agree with that, Barbara. So.
Yeah, yeah, I agree too. When it was categorized as a cozy, I was like, well, what's a cozy? And, I read the definition. I was like, well, Agatha Christie's a cozy, There's so many books that I love that are supposedly cozy. So I thought maybe call my book cozitional or cozyitional,
Oh, that's very good.
cozy and traditional. So, but I'm with you. It's probably more
It's a
traditional.
cute shorthand, but I actually may talk to John about changing the name of the club to Traditional Mystery because I think that's fairer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think cozy may exclude some readers while it brings other readers in. But there's a whole thing about genre that really has come up with online book selling and BISAC codes. And recommendations from Barnes and Noble or Amazon. If you like this book, then you're going to like these other six or whatever. And they're all based upon those codes, but often they don't really make any sense.
And often readers think they have a knee-jerk reaction. Oh, I don't like to read this kind. I don't like to read historical fiction. I don't like to read cozies or whatever. When you say, well, do you like, Agatha Christie? Do you like, Kristen Hanna? And they go, oh yeah, I love those. And you say, well,
Exactly. So genre labels are both inclusive and exclusive.
yeah.
And I worry that the exclusive part sort of trumps the inclusive part. There's a verb, by the way, I'm discarding. I try consciously never to use it anymore. Nothing trumps anything, right? My political statement for tonight, but it was a perfectly good word.
All right. Well, now maybe a better place to start, Peggy, is because I realize that we're not saying this is to let you tell us in your own words. Tell us what the book is about for starters, and then we'll jump into characters.
Oh, okay. So, well, I have to talk about characters in order to talk about the book because my main character is this tall, big-boned woman named Margaret
Oh, you
Finch.
can't introduce her because I have a nice introduction written
Oh,
about her. So give me the elevator pitch, the one line. It's a blah 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 blah.
okay. So she's a scientist. She works in a lab in the university. And I guess the point is that scientists actually would make great amateur detectives because the scientific method is basically what detectives use and what journalists use. And, you observe something, you ask a question, you form a hypothesis, and then you test it. And then Margaret is doing this with a murder that happens on the campus where she works. And she goes to town because she believes it's a murder when no one else thinks it's a murder. So, yeah.
Very good. Okay. Okay. So Margaret, she's not your traditional sleuth. She's a meticulous, routine-loving research assistant too, and she works in this university lab, as Peggy says. She's 54, or she will be in a day or two. I guess a day or two after the novel opens. It's almost her birthday, but she doesn't expect anybody to remember it. She's that kind of woman. She's tall, and she can be summed up, as Peggy nicely does in the book, as having an ungainly body, plain face, and fussy ways, which cause people to dismiss her. Secretly, they call her Big Bird, which is a really nice play on her name, which is Margaret Finch. She has not just like day of the week underwear, she has day of the week shirts. And they're all nature themed because she's really interested in science. She's a botany gal for sure. She loves plants, and she's smarter than almost anyone else in the lab, despite the fact that they are the trained scientists and she's not. And she has just a wonderful sense of humor, as I think Library Journal said. And then someone in the lab is killed, right? And nobody else seems to take the possibility of murder seriously. So she tries to solve it while at the same time trying to keep the work she's doing in the lab alive, which involves I think it's called a prickly bush. That just might be the cure for cancer. And over the course of the novel, we learn something else about her, which is maybe she also learns herself, which is that she is a very determined woman. So my first question is, which came first, Finch or Big Bird?
Finch came first. I was playing around with the names, and Margaret Finch popped into my head. And then this is kind of funny, but I was sitting listening to a very boring lecture, and my mind wandered, and all of a sudden I went, Big Bird. She's Big Bird. And then as soon as I thought Big Bird, she just popped into focus 100%.
So did you have, so when you thought Big Bird, is that when she came into, like, her physicality and everything came into place, or was that physicality there before the Big Bird name?
The physicality was there before. Journalists and writers, all writers are like magpies. We just pick bits and pieces of characters or people we know or people we've seen, people we've met. So as a journalist, I had met this amazing woman who was tall, big boned, super plain, and her whole life kind of revolved around her plainness. I mean, it affected every part of her life. So I was thinking about her, I thought about Margaret Finch, and then Big Bird, I was like, okay, I'm going to take that little piece and run with it. So
yeah, it's nice as it just, it just pops her into, like, you can see her so quickly. And one of the things that I love about this book, one of my problems with reading mysteries is that I often can't keep the characters, separated. And if I can't keep the characters separated, then, figuring out who done it is not that easy. And I love the puzzle. So you do a really great job of delineating your characters. And I'm just going to go through them really quickly because I think they all, describe really, really well. There's, and you can tell me if I forget anybody, there's Dr. Deaver, the brilliant and charismatic botanist boss. There's Veronica Ann Deaver, his wife, a somewhat forgotten scientist. She has a PhD in chemistry. And she'd had hopes that her hubs would, get a position at Harvard or someplace like that, where she could get a position too. But he instead ended up at Roosevelt, where there isn't money for a position for her. So she turns her chemical prowess to charity work, cooking, and in probably fashion design. There's Dr. Blackstone, who's the less brilliant botanist, or is he? Amy Blackstone, his wife, and their adoring children. And one of the lovely lines in the book is basically, how could a man whose children appear to adore him commit a horrible murder? And I'm not saying whether he's the murderer or not, but that's something that Margaret thinks about as she's going along. There's Dr. Rachel Sterling, the new assistant professor of biochemistry, who seems overly emotional at the death that happens very early on in the book. And whose family we'll say is more interesting than you might first imagine. Travis Zhang, did you say Zhang?
Zhang.
Zhang. He's the grad student who breaks everything. Calvin Hollowell, a freckled and neurotic postdoc in the lab. Emily, the undergrad who seems to want nothing but a story for her writing. Harold MacDonald, the dean, who may at one time have been a good scientist, but whose administrative duties, fundraising, and that dang Cameron Foundation grant have turned him into, as Peggy writes, a carnival barker. Beth Purdy, who's the office manager and gossip, from whom you learn a lot about the office. Lily, an adoring young undergrad who might have been Dr. Deaver's mistress. Joe Torres, the janitor with a secret past, who at least seems to become Margaret's ally for a bit. Officer Bianchi, the bumbling cop who doesn't do anything, causing Margaret to have to. Keith, Margaret's, as Peggy says, he's not so much a boyfriend or a date as a once-a-week dinner companion. They always go to Applebee's, and they always order the same things, but she likes the conversation even if she mostly has to listen. And there is Tom the cat, because, what's a mystery without a cat? Even though it's not a cozy, it's not that kind of cat. Let's see, have I missed anybody?
No, you did a great job.
So was any one of them more fun to write than any other?
So there's two that were fun to write, and it's weird to say this, but Tom the cat was super fun to write.
He comes across as very fun. Yeah.
I didn't want a cat in the book, and then no lie, as I'm writing, suddenly a cat appeared on the page, and I thought, well, I'll see what happens with the cat. And I had so much fun writing Tom the cat, who's this kind of scrappy, one-eyed hunter, fend for himself kind of guy. And I thought, well, he's a lot like Margaret in some ways. So he was really fun to write. And then I had fun writing Calvin, the neurotic postdoc who was probably never going to make it in academia. Because as like I said, I pick little pieces from people, and I have a friend who's like that, who I adore, but who is completely anxiety driven. And so I just took a little bit of that, and I just had fun playing with his anxieties, the way he faces the world. And yeah, so he was a really fun one to write. Although when I first started, he was too grumpy, and so I had to kind of rewrite him to make him not so grumpy. But yeah, I loved writing him.
One of the things that was really interesting, and for all of you, Peggy and I do belong in a writing group on the West Coast called the Rough Drafts, and so we read each other's work and we comment and we hopefully make stuff better. And so I've seen this book since the first draft, basically. I mean, the story of how Peggy wrote it is kind of amazing. She wrote it in about a second and a half, and it turned out to be just totally brilliant under a pressure that was really quite extraordinary. But so it's fun to see how the characters take shape, and it's not that none of them are that different, but they all in the final draft really popped to life in a way that you could see them there, but they are now so well defined and so vivid. It's just kind of amazing. What was the editing process like that made that happen?
That's a great question, Meg. And the rough drafts really helped. They kind of put me on a path. How they reacted to different characters kind of led me to kind of follow them. And one of the things that people kept saying, and I didn't realize, was more Joe the janitor. And he was sort of a secondary character, but then I played with him, and so he became a bigger part of the story. And as I developed his backstory, I just got really fascinated with Joe. And the rough drafts, like I said, really helped. They told me that Calvin was too grumpy, and so I made him not so grumpy. I made Margaret, I softened a little her edges. But yeah, the writing process, the editing process is that you write, the characters appear, and then you revise, and the characters get stronger as you revise. And during that revise, they're almost talking. It's almost like watching a movie and just typing it down.
Yeah.
You know them, as you know in your books. I'm sure you feel the same with your characters.
Oh, I wish they would speak to me more. Well, one of the things I noticed, probably the biggest difference between the first draft that we read in the rough drafts and the final, between the covers book, was the character of Joe, who really, I think I was one of the ones advocating for more Joe, and it really brings the story alive. One of the things you do, I think, incredibly well is you keep all the characters, including Joe in his own way, alive as possibilities. And this may be I've read every Agatha Christie that was ever published,
Yeah.
So it's always the least probable person who does it. And so you always have to keep your eye on everybody. But you do that really well. You keep us wondering who did it and trying to solve for who did it. I feel one of the problems with mysteries is that often I feel like I know who's done it by, chapter 3. And then when it turns out they're who done it, I'm like, this is not clever because I could figure it out. So did you know when you were writing it, did you know the ending? Did you know who was going to do it as you were writing it? Or did you keep all those possibilities up in the air because they were all up in the air in your head?
I'm a plotter. Like my outline for this book was 30 pages long. And so I think when I started, I wasn't sure who the killer was going to be. But then as I was plotting it, I thought, oh, this person has to be the killer. And then so I went back through my outline and planted the seeds that would lead to this person being the killer, but not so obviously. And so and through Margaret, I had her go through each of the possibilities and then think, oh, no, not that person, not that person. So it's a lot about plotting to get to the point where you know how you have to get to the killer. And I think that's really important, that you just don't want to do the ta-da at the end, like sometimes happens. And
Right.
how did that person where did that person come from?
Right. But I think one of the things you do really well, though, is I mean, it's interesting because I read it, and so obviously I knew who did it in the earlier drafts. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, huh, well, is it the same ending? Do I keep reading
Oh,
to see if it's the same ending because so many of the characters are kept in play, and so many of the characters have motives for killing and opportunity and all those things that we need. And so I do think that has to be really, I mean, I think an outline would really help that because you really can lay out everybody as a potential suspect and it works really well. So,
what else works really well is a college campus is sort of a bubble. It's almost a locked room with all kinds of possibilities for suspects. I realize that, there's the students, there's the professors, there's greed, there's jealousy, there's competition. There,
it,
it could be diabolical. It's the
right.
perfect setting
Right.
for a bunch of characters.
Right. You think about all the, the little Peyton place and everybody's, there's all the competition academically, and there's all the little infighting that happens in a small community, and there are all the, affairs and everything else that happens. And so you can just keep so many things up in the air and have so many opportunities. It just really worked really well. I was trying to think as I was reading it if I know of another kind of academic setting mystery, and I couldn't think of any. Can you go ahead, Barbara?
Well, there actually is another. Kate Kavari writes a series about a botanist, a female botanist in the 1920s,
Oh, yeah.
which I find really interesting. But one thing I thought the botanist assistant played into, there's with the anniversary of the double helix and all, um, Rosalind Franklin was a woman who really paved the way, did the basic research for the double helix, but nobody wanted to give her credit for it. And there's been a lot of commentary recently about women who were overlooked in science that actually did a lot of basic and groundbreaking work, but didn't really get credit for it. The men scooped in and swooped in, and so this book actually plays into some real events and probably ongoing. And then I think about Johnny Hillerman, who won his only Edgar for The Thief of Time, in which the mystery involved science and the bit.
Oh, no.
We just lost Barbara. Okay,
And
Barbara's frozen.
that
So
line that the how does it go? Something like, the violence is so high because the stakes are so low, applies. So, the mystery world has always embraced, I think, what's going on. It tends to cut along the edge of social change to contemporary mystery, but historical mystery also reminds us of how things were. And so I thought Margaret was a really interesting bridge, to how difficult it's always been for women in science to get the credit that they deserve, and also how professors tend to, not all, but there are many instances where professors have claimed credit for the work of their students, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah, that's
all that's real,
yeah.
I mean, you made it fictional, but it's all real. It's happened in the real world.
Yeah.
I'm so
One of the
glad you
things I
brought
love
that
about
up because
go
I
ahead.
did a lot of reading about women scientists who were forgotten, and they found a way to do certain things, or they discovered a drug for a certain, for cancer, and
Yeah,
then they were ignored. The main scientist, who was always male, took credit for it, and they weren't even in the acknowledgments or listed as an author. So I was a little outraged about that. So I wanted to give Margaret to paint that picture through Margaret, and not to be too serious, but it is something that's happening and has happened. And
exactly.
Has
yeah,
happened and still happens. It's extraordinary. You just I think of times when I, sat in a room and I would say, as a lawyer, and I would say something, room of men, and it would be like I didn't speak, and then my male colleague would say exactly, would even say as Meg just said, and everybody would go, "Oh, that's a great idea," as if it was his idea and not mine. And so I'm sure in the science world, it is, eight times worse. So, well, so here's a question, Peggy. I mean, this is really the science in here. So two questions, but I'll start with one, which is the science feels so real. So I don't think you're a scientist.
I am definitely not a scientist.
So how did you do that?
Um, so a couple things. I worked for UC Santa Cruz for a while as a writer, so I got to meet a bunch of amazing scientists and interview them. And my sister's also a scientist. She's an environmental toxicologist. So I picked her brain about what it's like. She was a lab manager for a while, and she was kind enough to write a list of 10 things that really bugged her as being a lab manager. And so they're included in the book. Parts of them are included in the book. But as a journalist, I do research, so I can't tell you how many YouTube channel things I watched about beaker sizes and mass spectrometry, and and I would look up like, what does a lab smell like, and and then I stole a little bit from the different scientists that I had interviewed. So and then I had my sister read it to make sure that it was right. So
Nice.
yeah, but I'm not a scientist, and I don't even play one on TV.
But you could. You do it very
Maybe.
So the next question is, so I mean, one of the the scientific work that Margaret is doing involves this. Is it called? Do I remember right? It's a prickly bush that they are exploring its possibilities for treating cancer. Is a prickly bush a real thing? Is that a real plant? And is it something that might actually have some influence in cancer, or is that all made up?
No, it's a real plant, but I changed the identity of the plant. So the plant, I put it in Brazil, but and I made it a bush, whereas this is more of a tree. But yeah, there is, and I can't remember the name of it. It's a Latin name, but it's from Australia, and they're doing research on it, and it has some very promising results for immunotherapy cancer drugs. But the problem is the bush is so dangerous, and it gives you these horrible rashes, that they're now trying to take the active part of the plant and see if they can grow it into another plant, like a tobacco plant, that they could use to synthesize the drug. So it is similar, but I kind of tweaked it a bit to make it not the same, because I didn't want to get in the weeds with that.
Yeah. Okay. And then the next question is, a shockingly large amount about the poisonous properties of plants. So should I worry the next time I give you bad feedback on a manuscript?
You might. No, I do. Like it's surprising now. I walk around going, well, that plant's poisonous. Oh, well, there's a poisonous plant over there. Well, look at that. There's a bouquet, and half the plant's flowers in it are poisonous. So yeah, I have a whole appreciation of poisonous plants.
Yeah.
And apparently there's a garden at the Cloisters in New York City that's all poisonous plants.
Really?
That you can tour. So if you're a fan of poisonous plants, you might want to go there.
That was actually kind of a thing. In past, people would have poison gardens. I mean, it's not just the cloister, which I've been to and which I find really fascinating, but there are lots of botanical gardens and others that will sequester poisonous plants. And then some of them that are poisonous also can be beneficial. Like, the one with digitalis, if you take too much of it, it'll kill you, but it can be used to treat heart disease. So sometimes it's the dosage rather than the poison, nature. It's the dosage that is critical to understanding it.
100%. That's foxglove. And there's a Taxol, for the anti-cancer drug that women go on after they've had breast cancer treatment.
Right.
That is also from the bark of the Pacific yew tree. So, there's all these plants that can be poisonous, but they also can heal. As I say, there's one letter difference between toxic and tonic.
Oh, that's
Really good line. I like that.
That's a very good line.
Very true. Yeah.
That should be in a new book. You should use that in your next book.
Oh, okay, I will.
Well, actually, that's a question I'd like to ask, because Margaret, I think she's too good to just be a single book protagonist. Are you planning to write something else about her?
I would love to write another book, and I'm outlining one, but as you know, it's up to the publisher whether Margaret will go on. So I've got my fingers crossed, and I've got an outline halfway done, and ready to go if they say they'd like another Margaret, because
With
I
the
love
Margaret.
Margaret.
Yeah, yeah. I do think that that's a lot of, it's interesting, the mysteries that really work. I mean, it's one part, the really good mystery like this is that, keeps you guessing and keeps you wondering who done it until the end and looking at everybody's motives and that kind of thing. But almost more importantly is the main character, the sleuth, because if it's somebody that we love, we'll go with them for a long time, and it almost go with them anywhere. And Margaret is definitely that kind of character. She's just
Well,
absolutely.
she is, but as I pointed out earlier, neurodivergent characters are sort of in vogue at the moment.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting. I didn't really think of her as neurodivergent until
oh,
you
she
said
absolutely is. Come on, Nate. No, she definitely is. And that, I think that's what's so intriguing, like in watching Ludwig on television or Extraordinary Attorney Wu or, any of the other ones, is watching how these people navigate the world differently, but they turn out to have excellent detecting skills.
Yeah.
And there are always cycles as in crime fiction, particularly about what kinds of sleuths are people interested in. Back in the 90s, it was the woman sleuth movement. It was Sarah Paresky and Sue Grafton, Margaret Muller, Marcia Muller, whatever. And then that kind of faded away and other things came in. At the moment, podcasters are replacing private eyes. There are all kinds of mysteries where
Huh.
podcasters and that whole true crime vibe has become kind of the new private eye novel.
That's kind of nice because you can a podcaster can go anywhere and ask anything in a way that one of the problems with a
But
repeat.
it also brings in like group crime solving.
Mm.
John Sanford's last book was absolutely amazing. It's called Lethal Prey, and he told you in the first chapter who was killed, how they were killed, and who did it, which is a really interesting structure. And then when Lucas and Virgil, the two sleuths, arrive at the scene, the police officers, they are surrounded by podcasters and they all have followers and everybody wants to like work the crime. And so finally Lucas and Virgil give up and bring them into it. And it's fascinating the way he shows that. And I thought, what a great narrative structure. That's completely different,
Mhm.
for John and in general. But I thought, he sees the value of this different kind of, you know,
Yeah,
group crime solving, which is happening in real life,
yeah.
you know. But I think that the neurodivergent is also something people are really interested in. How do people navigate the world differently, and what special skills does that give them? So, you may not have intended Margaret to be that way, but
That's
she
a question.
definitely.
Did you? Did you think of her as neurodivergent?
I didn't really, but I because I took some of my characteristics and put them on her, which I'm so organized, you
But
know.
you know, it's absolutely true that the way she plans her wardrobe,
It is
the way
true.
she does everything is just classic. I mean,
Yeah,
it really is. And
it's
yeah, so
interesting.
I
Yeah,
found that, I think that speaks to people.
yeah,
And
You know,
right now when we're in a moment where being different, other than, a kind of older version of America seems to be swamping us. I think in a way this is a bit of a pushback, in publishing and with readers, not to just accept like, the trad wife or whatever thing. I do think that what's going on in the world tends to push um, publishing or authors, and then there's a cluster that will develop kind of where everybody thinks, oh, this is so good, I'll write one of those, or
right.
publishers think, well, people like that, so we'll do more of those.
Or that,
So I
right.
think you're right on trend, so to speak, whether you intended it or not. And I think it's wrong to say it's a trend because I think she's genuine.
yeah, I intended her to be what you're talking about, to be dismissed because she's odd. you know.
Yeah, peculiar was the word that came to my mind. Peculiar,
Yeah.
she's, yeah.
And that is happening in our world today. If you don't fit the mold, if you're not beautiful and, have certain values and do things certain ways, you're dismissed. And so that was a pushback. That for me to create Margaret was that idea that, oddness, being eccentric, being different, um, really has a value and a place in society, a place in the world.
Yeah.
But I understand a number of reviewers, I would say half say she's neurodivergent, which is fine. That's fine with me.
Yeah. She does, when I think about her, I think, well, yeah, she's a little obsessive compulsive. Everything but that's something that serves her really well in the lab. And, in a lab where if you're not really careful, then things get contaminated and it ruins experiments. And so, and honestly, a lot of the scientists I know are a little obsessive compulsive. So,
Silicon Valley, it's kind of, in a way, it's celebrated in Silicon Valley when you think, man, look at Steve Jobs. I mean, people like that, they were definitely,
yeah.
ADHD or whatever you want to call it. What was that breaking movie years ago with Dustin Hoffman? Remember?
Oh, Rain Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So it's just, and all the stuff that RFK is doing, is just highlighting, is there something we're doing that's creating more of this, or have these people always been there and we just paid no attention to them? I mean, I
That's
think it's an interesting question.
So I'm gonna note also, Barbara, that what you are saying, the names that you're naming are men, and I think that men who are neurodivergent are given more slack than women who are more neurodivergent, which as Peggy shows here, tends to be, women who are different tend to be dismissed. Men who are different, well, they might be brilliant, but women who are different, well, they're just different.
I
And
think that's true, and I think that comes across in your book.
yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I agree. And also if there's the double standard too of men and then, not being attractive, like our whole society is so focused on being attractive and being young. And if you're neither, you start to be shoved off to the side where, I think middle-aged women, as Margaret is, they've been through so much, they've survived, they've pain, joy, they've done so many things. They've got a war chest full of tools to get through life, and they have great advice. I think they should be celebrated instead of being shoved aside, which is kind of what happens.
It's interesting. One of the things that happens in the book is, I think about, there are basically two main settings here. One is the lab where Margaret is very in control, but without anybody recognizing that she's in control. And that's kind of echoed in her home, which is a really isolated cabin that she inherited from an aunt, that's up a long windy road. So, and she can go there and she, has her garden and she's in control there. And the difference is that there at home, nobody bothers her. She really is by herself. So how did you come about making that her home, and what were you doing with that particular piece of setting?
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing, but the one place Margaret is wild is in her garden. Her
Yeah.
garden is just a riot of plants.
Yes.
It's not in order. It's just colors here, colors there. But the setting is really interesting because I was going on a hike with my scientist sister, and we climbed up this hill and went through the forest and the woods, and she's pointing out all the different plants for me. And we get to this spot and there's the foundation of an old homestead cabin. And I turned around standing in the middle of the site, and I looked out, and it was a river valley with big fancy houses. And I said, oh, this is where Margaret lives.
Oh,
And so that's where she lives. And I don't specify where it is in the book, but it's a very real place. And the cabin, there really was a cabin there that was an old homestead cabin. So
let me say a word about Joe, because Margaret does sort of gain a partner in sleuthing, and Joe is a really interesting guy, and he again is a as an amateur sleuth because he has a background. I don't know if I should reveal it because
No, 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 no,
spoiler.
no,
Right.
no,
But he's also the instrument by which eventually good things happen that Margaret probably on her own could not achieve. So his story, I think, is really essential to the book as well. What happened to him, how he got the way he is, what his particular skills are. So, it's generally true that in amateur sleuth books, there's a partner. I mean, Poirot had, Hastings, and Miss Marple had her nephew, and there's usually it's a heavy load for one person to carry. So, Joe, is he a suspect? Is he not? Whatever is, I think, a great foil for Margaret, and the book is better for it. Did you always have him um, written in that way, or did he develop and you ran with it?
He was always there. That's a great point to talk about Joe and partners in crime solving. He was always there. One of the things that I thought is a janitor is often invisible too. Like they can move through the world and where they are and no one notices them. No one sees what they do. So he would, be the perfect person to find things that maybe Margaret can't see. And it was the rough drafts and my editor who both said, more Joe. And why is Joe at the university?
Right.
And I had in my head, like, I knew I was there, but I thought, oh, nobody can figure it out. So Joe, I gave Joe a whole backstory, and he became an integral part of the book. And yeah, he's really good for Margaret. He's kind of her foil, her mentor, her friend, and a person that doesn't have a lot of friends. So
right. And they're very similar in some ways and yet different in other ways. I mean, Joe has oddly a confidence that Margaret doesn't have,
Right.
and a way of, he is also different looking, and he is very good at dismissing comments about how different looking he is in a way that laughs at himself and also a little bit at the people who are, poking fun of him or whatever. I really I think he's a totally charming character. He and Margaret are my favorite characters in the book for sure. And so I hope that if you're doing a Margaret too, that Joe will be there. So
Joe will definitely be there. Joe will definitely be in the
That's
second
an
book.
excellent note to end on. I'm going to bring Patrick in because we do have a time limit this evening. So Patrick, is there any comment from the audience that you'd like to share?
Let's see. There was one. Somebody was asking about Meg's next book that's coming out. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about that.
My next book, I don't know what my next book is going to be yet. Typewriter Beach came out in July. The paperback will come out June 30th of next year, and I'm scrambling. I mean, I'm working on a few ideas to see what's next. But if I tell you what's next, it will not be next. That is how I jinx myself. So, But thank you for asking.
No problem.
Yeah.
That's really about it. I don't really see any questions tonight.
Okay. Well, sometimes this is a little early.
Yeah,
we do
everybody's
better.
tuned in.
Yeah, well, we do better when we are on Pacific Daylight Time, which we never are. We are on Mountain Standard Time all year long, but it becomes
Oh, interesting. Yeah, the
yeah, I
time
know.
Right.
melts.
It
Yeah.
confuses everybody. We're the only state that doesn't do daylight savings time. So, the 3 hour difference means that California is on a better time. Right now it's only 4 o'clock when we started in California, so it kind of goes that way. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us and talking about your marvelous book. I think that if you're looking for gifting books for Christmas, the botanist assistant would certainly be one that I would applaud. Right. It's really fun. Now, are you familiar with the Kate Cavari series?
I'm not. I just saw it, I guess maybe about a month ago, and I thought, I didn't want to read it while I'm writing it,
No,
I'd
No,
like to look at it.
it's very different. But
Yeah.
when I brought up that difference between the British definition of cozy and the American, she falls into the British, because it's a British series of traditional mystery rather than. But the books are very, very similar. Plants are hugely important. Academic stuff in fighting and stealing credit and how does the woman advance? And then she has an additional problem, the heroine in that, with her own family, who thinks that it is very degrading for her as a upper class person to be working at all, but even worse to be, in science.
Well,
So,
that's interesting because, I mean, if you think about like Beatrix Potter, Beatrix Potter was fascinated with plants and nature and drawing animals and
well, poison, I mean, was a huge weapon for, for forever. I mean, Augustus Caesar's wife, poisoned him by tying fruit to a tree, so he wouldn't realize. I mean, the Romans used it, everybody used it.
yeah.
And, it's always been, I think, Agatha Christie, served as a pharmacist in the war, so she knew a lot. Ellis Peters, the same. So poison has always been a very popular, shall we say, method of murder in books, and I think it's fascinating. But I really we're sort of moved up from women from it as a women's weapon into something um, more widely available in the late Victorian and 20th century and so forth. But, it was dismissed as a woman's weapon for generations, as women's were thought not to be strong enough, to stab people and do all this other stuff, which
Yeah.
is, which
And the
is
truth is probably just that we're clever and we use it better,
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
if you look at things now too, there's so many poisonings. What was that Bulgarian uh, journalist, I think he was, they had the castor bean ricin on the end of an umbrella and they shot it into him when he's walking. He
Yeah.
died. There was something in Britain. There was two.
yeah, the Russians have used it, and then North Korea, took out some relative of Kim by getting some woman to. So, I mean, it's always with us. And as I said, sometimes it's just a matter of dosage where you take something, and turn it into a weapon that didn't need to be. But
And for a mystery, it works really well because it can, be slow acting or whatever. And so it's
exactly.
just, it's an easier weapon to, if you shoot somebody, well, they've got to be physically there and did nobody hear?
Right.
Well, it's a poison, it opens up a lot of possibilities in a way
It
that's just,
does. There were a couple of mysteries that used Tylenol as a weapon. Too much Tylenol is fatal. We live surrounded by oleander. We have houses here that have oleander fences, and oleanders can be again very poisonous, but it's so prevalent we don't really think about it that way. I have to remember not to let the dogs get near poinsettias, which are
yeah,
poisonous to dogs, for example. So poisons are, I mean, it's kind of a trapdoor. You have to really think about it.
yeah.
So
They're also associated with witchcraft.
yeah,
Witchcraft. Uh,
exactly.
Right.
And that was partly because women knew the dosage. Um,
yeah,
the wise women.
Midwives and, right.
so
Yeah,
they were dangerous.
exactly. Anyway, it's a fascinating topic, and I do think your book is truly wonderful for so many reasons. So thank
Wonderful.
you very much for joining us and talking about it. And let me wish you both a wonderful holiday season, and we'll look forward to talking to you again.
You as
Same
well,
to you.
Barbara. Peggy, I'm so glad to see the book doing so well and so
Me
glad
too.
to have this chance to chat with you about it. Barbara, thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome.